Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's event. I'm Marissa, and this is Lindsay, and we're the co-chairs of Women in Design here in the school. And we're honored to be representing the organization, introducing tonight's guest, Rosa Sheng. We're extremely lucky to have her here tonight. She's in town from San Francisco, where she's the principal at Smith Group JJR and the 2018 president and founding chair of Equity by Design, a committee of the San Francisco AIA chapter. With some 22 years of experience in architecture and design, Rosa's led a variety of award-winning and internationally acclaimed projects, ranging from the highly technical development of Apple's distinctly minimal glass retail stores to the innovative and sustainable LEED Gold certified Loki Graduate School of Business at Mills College in Oakland, home state of California. In 2013, fueled by the persistent and striking inequity of representation in architectural practice, where women compose maybe 12 to 18% of AIA members, licensed architects, and senior firm leadership, Rosa founded the committee Equity by Design. She's initiated a national movement for equitable practice, catalyzed by the circulation of two pivotal equity in architecture surveys, one in 2014, one in 2016, surveying nearly 9,000 respondents representing all 50 states and nations on 6 continents. The next survey will take place in the spring of this year, and we look forward to both its findings and its impact.
These surveys have teased out the underlying tensions that persist throughout careers in architecture and design, setting oneself up for professional development, achieving pay equity, and maintaining flexibility between work and other life commitments. They've revealed career pinch points, including the time and financial burden of the educational process, paying professional dues, obtaining licensure, balancing caregiving roles, and navigating the glass ceiling, which brings us to the missing 32%. It's a troubling metric, one which tells us that while schools have reached nearly equal rates of enrollment and graduation, architecture as a professional practice still loses 32% of its women between graduation and licensure. Though this may be our present reality, Equity by Design tells us that this doesn't have to be the future. They've hosted quarterly workshops and hackathons as a means to turn these metrics into action and change. Equity by Design has sold out 5 symposia, delivered presentations across the US and abroad, and received widespread media coverage from the likes of Architect Magazine, Architectural Record, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, TEDx Philadelphia, and NPR. Together, Rosa and her team have initiated a national call to action for all gender identities to help realize the goal of equitable practice and to retain talent, advance the profession, and communicate the value of design to society. So please join us in welcoming Rosa.
Thank you so much. I know it's the beginning of the semester and you're starting studio and classes again, so I really am thankful that you made time in your schedule to be here tonight. So let's see if I can advance. Okay. So I'd like to start off the discussion before we get into the meat of it with a question I always tend to ask, and that is to get everybody on the same page. There seems to be a lot of confusion about the difference between equity and equality. So when we talk about equity, we like to make sure that everybody has the same understanding. So how many people in the room, no right or wrong answer, no judgment, think they have a good idea of the definition between the two? Just show of hands. Again, no judgment. And that's usually what we see. So I found this meme a while back, and I like to start with it in terms of defining the two. Equality, as it's traditionally meant, is everybody gets the same exact resources, the same exact piece of the pie, regardless of the outcome, right? So that's fair and that's just if everybody gets the same thing. In the equity lens, on the right side of the meme, there's this idea that equity is about minimizing barriers to maximize the potential for success. So people acknowledging that we need different resources at different times, one size does not fit all, and the people with the resources that don't need them for that particular situation or challenge recognize in others the need and therefore have this empathy eye of providing that resource. So on the right, there's a win-win. Everybody can see over the fence, World Series, Boston Red Sox, yay team, right? And then this idea that somebody raised was really interesting to me. Well, what if I'm always the tall person giving out my resources? What about that? So I happened to say, well, the likelihood that you'll actually be the short person in your lifetime is ever so increasing. We see that with the natural disasters and things just randomly happening. Shootings today was reported in Kentucky, the 11th of the year that was reported, and the 50th of the semester in all schools. So the likelihood that something bad could happen to any of us is increasing. So as architects, I ask the question, why does equity matter in architecture? But we start off with the question of why do architects matter? We know that there's some anecdotal conversations about architects losing their value and people not understanding what architects do. How do we create a value system where we are recognized and we do meaningful work? In this comedy sketch with I Love Lucy, if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go to YouTube. Lucy and Ethel are homemakers, and they go and they want to seek jobs. So they go to this chocolate factory, and throughout the day, they have failed to accomplish any of their tasks. The last chance they have is to go on this conveyor belt and just wrap the chocolates. Pretty easy, right? So the conveyor belt goes faster and faster, and they stuff the chocolates in their shirts, they stuff the chocolates in their hats, in their mouths, just to keep up appearances. How many people feel like you're stuffing the chocolates in your mouth, keeping up appearances? So your reward is this, the same as Lucy and Ethel. The boss comes in, sees you're doing an amazing job, and says, "Great job, ladies, speed her up." The conveyor belt keeps going faster and faster. So it's against your own best interest to be perceived as just getting by and hiding your challenges, right? Let's see if we can get this to advance. And then the third question, why does architecture matter? So I grew up with this idea in the suburbs that architecture was about track houses and malls, because that was the experience of my immediate surroundings. So when we have a low standard and we don't question design and we don't educate the public about design, this is what we end up with. We end up with malls of America. And that changed for me when I went to China one summer to visit my grandfather, and he made sure I toured a lot of places of value of monuments, the Forbidden City, the Great Wall, and he was great in educating me about architecture and saying that architecture wasn't about the immediacy of its use or the people, it was rather a time capsule of a civilization meant to last beyond any one person's lifetime and to provide profound impact. And at that moment that he was saying all this to me in Chinese and I was trying to translate it in my head about what all it meant, I realized at that point that I wanted to have profound impact and I wanted to be an architect. So went to school at Syracuse University, shout out, go Orange to Syracuse alum in the house. Did the traditional education, learned about architecture through a Eurocentric lens. I questioned that because I came from a non-Eurocentric heritage. As you saw, the Great Wall and the Forbidden City, where did that plug into this Eurocentric learning about design? But I loved all that I learned, and I sketched, and you could see the Pantheon, and Syracuse had a Florence program, and we studied and we traveled throughout Europe. And I had this idea that I was going to become the next great architect. Whether it was Le Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright or Frank Gehry, I was going to be that next famous architect because that's what we were taught. Well, I graduated in a recession, and ironically, my first job was designing malls, going back to my roots, right? And casinos and bathroom details and elevator details. And I said I wanted more, and I was questioning at that point whether architecture was the right profession for me. And my employers at the time said, well, this is it. You've got to pay your dues. We're showing you the ropes. You've got to do the licensure thing and build up your experience. And I thought to myself, well, that's not good enough for me. What do I do next? Well, luckily for me, a friend and alumni from Syracuse worked in Pittsburgh for Boll and Swinsky Jackson and said, hey, why don't you come out to Pittsburgh? We're doing some really cool projects. There's this company called Pixar Animation Studios. They do digital animation. What was that at the time, right? So, okay, this sounds really crazy and interesting. Let's go to Pittsburgh so we could go out to California. And of course, that didn't work out right away. I spent a year in Pittsburgh, but got to work and was luckily enough privileged to work with Steve Jobs. We had bi-weekly meetings with him where we would fly out to Pittsburgh. But towards the middle of the project, the client, the head of facilities, asked us if we could do anything differently because the progress of the project wasn't moving fast enough. Steve wasn't satisfied with the designs, and we weren't communicating fast enough, flying back and forth. So they took us out to dinner, plied us with drinks, and asked us what we could do differently. And the craziest thing is that I said, "You can move us out to California." And everybody laughed at this crazy idea. But 6 months, less than that, 3 months later, they shipped a team out, and that became the San Francisco office for Boland Swinsky Jackson. And we had this incredible time with incredible opportunities as a project architect of the Pixar Animation Studios project, the Steve Jobs building. And it was a lesson learned in not being afraid to ask the crazy question or proposing the crazy answer. So fast forward, at that time, he had gone back to Apple, and he was starting this crazy idea of a retail store for just Apple products. And at that time, they were only about 3% of the market share. And people laughed and said, "Look at Compaq, they weren't able to do it, you're not gonna be able to do it either." And he challenged that idea, and he had this reality distortion field. Some of you may have heard of that phrase, but he questioned and said, well, why not? And he pushed us really hard in the development of the first Apple stores, the high-profile stores with the glass staircases that didn't exist at the time, to say, why can't we do this? Why can't we have an all-glass structural staircase without steel structural supports? So we put on our reality distortion lenses with him, and we challenged the impossible, so suspending disbelief for just long enough so that we could iterate and finally came up with the solution that is now ubiquitous, so building glass staircases instead of glass ceilings. And luckily, I was fortunate enough to be on the patent because I knew at some point people wouldn't believe that I was on that project, and I thought that's gonna be a good thing later on, to have my name on the patent. You could see from the picture on the right that my husband is in the photo with me. We had our photos taken at the glass staircase close to the eve of the opening of the store. And it was a joke, actually, because when I got engaged, they said, why don't you get married in the Apple store? And we laughed and said, haha, we didn't get married there, but we had wedding photos taken because it was pouring rain outside and it was close by. Good photo op. So last of the Apple projects that I worked on was the Cube in New York City and GM Plaza. And at that point, I didn't think that gender was a barrier to my advancement as progressing as an architect. But then I got married and I got pregnant with my first child, and I would go to meetings and my belly was swelling, and the developer at the time, Harry Macklow, he would joke around and he would say, which one of you was responsible for this? Was it you? Was it you? And it was, of course, all men and one woman, right? So that was the time I thought, hey, this isn't fair. This is weird. This is awkward. But luckily, I had a good comeback, which was to say, well, Harry, I'm going to name the kid Macklow after you. And then he said, no, don't do that. So that was kind of funny. And at the opening, I did bring my daughter and my husband, and an amazing thing happened because I announced that I was retiring from the Apple retail world. I was going to do other projects that allowed me to navigate work-life balance. And then a surprising thing happened. Steve said, oh, that's too bad, but why don't you come out and celebrate with us tonight? We're going out to dinner with the team, and we'd love for you to come with us, but we only have one spot at the table. So your husband and your child can't come, sorry. And I said, oh my gosh, chance of a lifetime, but I couldn't go because at the back of my head, there are barriers. I was breastfeeding at the time, I wasn't gonna tell him that. And I just said, sorry, I'm so flattered that you asked, but I can't go. And he was puzzled. Nobody says no to me, right? And I thought, stupid, chance of a lifetime. Who would ever give up dinner with Steve Jobs, right? So in the middle of the day, he comes back again, and he says, all right, I got a spot for your husband, but no kids tonight. Can you get a babysitter in New York City? And again, no way, I couldn't do it, right? I wasn't leaving my 9-month-old behind or trying to get a babysitter. And the funniest thing happened at the end of the day, which is that the room was packed, and he comes across the room. It was the parting of the Red Sea, like Moses, and he says this. All right, you drive a hard bargain, the kid can come, but if she poops, she pees, she cries, she's out. What an invitation, right? But luckily, I knew him for the time that we worked together on Pixar and Apple, and I knew that he was trying to be the tough guy. He was trying to be the Wizard of Oz, you know, the man behind the curtain, tough on the outside, but soft on the inside. And I realized at that point, we did go to dinner, that he was my biggest champion. And it was a kind of aha moment that in order to succeed in this profession, not only do we need champions that speak up for us and ask us literally to the table multiple times, but we also need to be and cultivate champions. We need to pay it forward to the next generation. So fast forward to my next project was an all-women's business school in Mills College of Oakland, California, and it was a new project type for me, an awareness about the lack of women in the C-suite. So they recognized that as a need. They created this program out of nothing, a startup with just 10 people the first year. So it was year 5 when they asked us to help them design this school with them, and they wanted to walk the talk. So the school itself is about business, socially responsible business, and then they wanted to be able to have a building that was an experience that inspired people to challenge what was possible. So in the end, they also said that the team needed to have equal representation. So women in leadership positions. We had a woman leading the structural engineering, mechanical engineering, superintendent, what have you, including myself as a project manager for the architects. And again, it won LEED Gold, first business school building in California, and multiple awards. But it was this idea that it still inspires today, and it grew and built this relationship with the school that hasn't ended. That they have a conference every year. It's the 10th annual conference this year about social responsibility, and it's a joy to go back every year to see that they're still walking the talk. So at the end of that, and as you could see, the student body is diverse. So not just women, but men, people of color, people of all different socioeconomic backgrounds, really hitting hard at these issues and being social entrepreneurs. But then at the end of that, the recession hit 2009, and I had my second child, and I was at a point in my career where I felt the barriers more so than I'd ever done before, and what translated into what we call pinch points in the survey. There's this quote by Lin-Manuel Miranda that's very poignant to me. We all grapple with the paradox that tomorrow is not promised, but we make plans anyway. What do we do when we feel like there's no support? What do we feel like when we want to quit? Is this kind of marching order that we don't know what's coming, we can be afraid, or we can make plans to solve those issues and challenges. I was at a point when I was ready to leave architecture. I was at a very depressed moment in my life, postpartum, what have you, compounded by the recession. But there were these lights shining as examples of not quitting, whether it was architect Barbie with Despina Strategakos and Kelly Hayes McAloney, whether it was Carolyn James, who's in the audience tonight, and Ariel Esselin-Lichten with the petition for Denise Scott Brown, whether it was Beverly Willis Foundation or Lean In, those were lights to say, keep going, do not quit. And in that self-evaluation moment, there was this realization that women were not represented in architecture as we should be, that again, the statistics show that we are, as we graduate, we are about 50-50, and then that number diminishes quickly over time. So I went to my first Missing 32% conference and was on a panel about negotiation. And after that, everybody was fired up and committed and said, we needed to do something. We're tired of just talking about it. We need action. What are we going to do? So we were all fired up with them. We said, yes, we need action. What are we going to do? We're going to do a survey. That's what we said. We had no idea how to do a survey. We're going to find out what the problems are, and then we'll solve that, right? And at that point, I felt like I committed to eating a whale. So Shel Silverstein has this poem about Melinda May, this little girl who touts she's going to eat this giant whale. Everybody laughs at her and says, there's no way you could do it. And she is so indignant, and she says, by golly, yes, I can. Well, guess what? She did eat the whale. It took her 89 years. And I thought, good God, I do not want to be Melinda May. I did commit to doing this, but I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to ask my friends to get their forks, come to the same table. And while we could all be eating our own whales of frustration and challenge, why don't we eat the same whale? Kind of gross, but it could be a vegan whale. It's a figurative whale. But if we all ate the same whale together, it will not take 89 or 110 years to see parity in equitable practice. because that is the reality. If we wait and do nothing and just let natural things happen, it will take another 110 years, according to statistics. And then another alum here, Alexandra Lang, Loeb Fellow, was published at the time, Architecture's Lean In Moment. And this was an aha moment for me that she said, we need to create a new set of best practices that will, as a design project in and of itself, based on data, shared examples and interpretation. Once written, we need to find partners who will adopt them firm by firm, sector by sector. So that was our call to action. First study was in 2014. I'm not going to go over the details, but you can find the information online in our full report. There was this concept of pinch points, the idea that throughout your career, from when you graduate all the way through when you retire, that there could be times of challenge and frustration that cause you to contemplate leaving not only your firm that you're in, but also architecture potentially. Hiring, whether you came out during a recession or an economic boom, paying your dues, doing those silly little bathroom details and the meaningless work. Licensure, the challenges and the roadblocks and the cost of getting licensed, or even the significance. Why should we get licensed? How many people here just feel if licensure is important or not? Just a show of hands. Is it important? Okay, not too bad. And then working parents, which transformed into caregiving, because it's not just about parents, it's about self-care, it's about care for your loved ones, it's about care for the elderly and your community around you. So time to care is an important topic. And finally, the glass ceiling. Implicit bias is something that we knew was there anecdotally, but didn't have a lot of research on, so we decided to support that analysis. And in 2016, so we had 22,000 respondents in the first one, and then we had 8,664 in the second one, and then we added another layer called career dynamics. So not only are there pinch points, there are challenges that could happen to you at any point in your career, multiple times, or continuously throughout your career. Really depressing, right? So can you find the right fit? Can you find meaningful work? Can you find work-life integration? Can you find a place that will value you and give you professional development opportunities? What if you wanted to take a break from architecture and do something else and come back? And what if pay equity or being valued for what you did was a constant struggle, and it is for many. This study was not just about women in architecture. It was about men and women of all race and ethnicities. And we also did study non-binary gender to the point where we asked the question, but we didn't do well enough because we only got 6 respondents. So this year, we're asking a lot of our allies to help circulate the survey so that we get more people so that we can start analyzing those that are in different gender identifications. We did look at race and ethnicity, as you'll see on the right. Predominantly, this is reflective of who is practicing right now in architecture. And before I roll into what will be a giant tasting menu of a lot of information, I don't want you to get stressed out that the slides went by too quickly, because the full video of the entire presentation, this is about 50% of the slide data, is on our website online, and we will be publishing the final report, which has more information than you know what to do with. But it is there for you at your choosing, so here we go. Most of our respondents varied in age, so you could see the younger respondent pool was mostly women, the elder respondent pool was mostly men. To course correct for that in our analysis, we always look at things by years of experience, not age, but how long you've been practicing in the profession. So first order of magnitude is top reasons why people left their last job. And this is concurrent with why people leave architecture as well, which we did it in the previous study. Number 1 is better opportunities. 2 is no promotion opportunities, low pay, relocation, long hours, lack of role models, lack of professional development, lack of meaningful work. You'll see these themes repeating over and over again in different contexts. So what are the top predictors of positive, strong firm culture that allows people to stay in their current job? Values, alignment of your values and the firm's values. That was a top answer. A seat at the table, being able to be heard and also influence the decision-making process. And meaningful work, that your day-to-day work is not bathroom details, but something that's going to contribute to your long-term career goals. Those things that detracted from that attitude and idea about positive work culture were that there was no preparation by your firm supporting professional development, and that you had no friends. That's something that we kept seeing over and over again. So friendships are important. Why they're important, you will see later on. When asked who do you ask for career guidance, we had a variety of answers. We tend to see a slight trend with mostly men asking for senior guidance from senior leaders, less women. On the someone else side, we see more women asking those that are their peers, people outside their firms that are in senior leadership, or family and friends. But the positive outcome of people who actually get access to senior leaders and guidance, you can see the uptick for both men and women, but significantly more for women in their career trajectory. So retention probability, energized work, career optimism, work-life flexibility, and focus. We also looked at this new idea of a spectrum, the metrics of success, in terms of burnout and engagement. So of the different 15 questions we asked people, do you have autonomy at work? Again, seat at the table, are you confident about your day-to-day work? Are you satisfied? Do you find it meaningful, et cetera, et cetera? We found that most people answered high on the spectrum. So the 3 line is actually the neutral, and then anything above 3 is positive. But towards the end, we saw that work-life, workload, and effective promotion process were constant challenges for both men and women. Likelihood of engagement and burnout. So on the right side, those who were likely to be more engaged, they answered that they believed that their day-to-day work was connected to their long-term career goals and that they were given feedback on an ongoing basis. So not the annual review, but a constant check-in with the people that were their report tos or senior leaders. Those that felt that they were more likely to be burnt out answered that their highest aspiration was to be an unlicensed staff designer, that they didn't know the performance evaluation criteria, or that they didn't have those valuable friendships. When they were challenged, they didn't have anybody to go to. So we shift gears to pay equity, which is an important topic that I know that a lot of you are concerned about, talking to some of you at lunchtime. Average salaries are lower than other industries, and we know that already. But even compounding that is the fact that men and women are paid differently, even starting at the beginning of their careers. So approximately, you can't see it because they're so close together, but starting at $3,000 difference between men and women on average between our respondents, crescendoing all the way up to $25,000 to $30,000 towards the end of careers. So why is that happening? We also analyzed that with gender, so white males making the most than their non-white male counterparts, white females, and then unfortunately non-white female counterparts. We also looked at it from the different roles that people play in firms, so not just by the years of experience. We noticed, shockingly, that design principals had the biggest gap, making less than principals in charge, but making between 20 to 40,000 less are women who are design principals. And that is compounded by information that we see supporting that creativity bias. Namely, the Fuqua Business School at Duke University did a study on creativity bias where they did 5 different studies, the first of which, luckily for us, happened to be a simulation of architecture portfolios. So again, simulated same exact images and sketches and renderings. One was named a male applicant, the other was a female applicant, and they were supposed to rate the creativity of both portfolios. Well, guess what happened? Both men and women rated the male portfolio more creative than the female portfolio. They also did that as an analysis with fashion design and didn't get the same results. The variance was closer. And then to kind of additionally postulate if that creativity bias is there, we did the Google search challenge, which is to name the profession on Google, type it in, and then see what pops up. So this was the first pop-up of famous architect, all white male, except for Zaha. Yay, Zaha. But we have to change that. Success in negotiation. So part of pay equity has to do with your ability to negotiate. How many of you think you're good negotiators for design? You can advocate the heck out of design. Yes? I hope so. Okay, we had this discussion at lunch. While we are strong at advocating for our design aspirations and goals and thoughts and theories, we are weak at negotiating for our salaries and things that we think are related to money, so contracts, change orders from the contractor. So we have to get better at this. Our survey said less than 35% men and women negotiated for their salaries when they found them unsatisfactory. There is a taboo. And then I know there's a lot of information here, but the takeaway is that the negotiators did better than the non-negotiators. So if you don't ask, you don't get. But then there's the soft skills of learning how to ask and when to ask, and the value proposition that you bring to the table. But sadly, at a point where in the middle of the career, the women negotiators were still making about the same as the male non-negotiators. So there's a bias towards women about negotiating. The likelihood of becoming a principal, again, alarming aha moment was that the non-white males were least likely to become principals in the respondent pool than the rest of their counterparts, and we have to figure out why. As far as gender balance in leadership, most people answered that their firms were perceived as mostly male. And again, that is compounded by the fact that there's been this evolutionary process of women going into architecture and the problems and the hurdles of staying. But we also find that most of the leaders in architecture that are women are in small firms or practices, so starting their own firms. And in the large firms, there's a 7% disconnect between the likelihood of men being more likely to be principals than women. Early career trajectories and perceptions. So this is important to all of you who will be new grads pretty soon. The things that were judged as more positive outlooks were the workload, the career optimism, and work-life flexibility. In terms of more negative was perceptions were more the meaningfulness of the work, the involvement in decision-making, the overall energy for the projects that they were involved in, and the likelihood that they would stay in the firm that they were in. What we learned from people leaving was that most people that left the profession, men and women, were in that 0 to 5 year range because we believe of the disconnect between what we're taught in school is important versus what is valued in practice. And then when we look at the office tasks of men and women in those 0 to 5 years, we learned that females are less likely to do the following: firm operations, strategy, planning and thinking, BIM, design, technology, or firm project standards. They are more likely to take care of the housekeeping roles in the firm, which include office, library management, and office parties. So don't take on the role of office party planner or social planner, please. Just kidding. If you want to do that, that's fine. It's important too. But also go for those other things that you normally don't get a chance to do. Early career retention likelihood. So the ones that said that they're more likely to stay, again, had more access, one-on-one access to senior staff, and they believed they knew what the performance evaluation criteria was, the pathway to advance up the ladder, if you will. Those that didn't believe that they were going to stay, didn't see a path forward, they didn't see the performance evaluation criteria, they didn't have any friendships at work, there was no prep for new roles, and even if their firm had evaluation criteria, they did not know what it was. So you could see the effect of that. More men were likely to stay if they didn't know what the firm evaluation criteria were, even if they had something written down, right? So not only is it good to have performance evaluation criteria, you have to tell everybody for those practitioners out there and the firm leaders. Value of licensure. So we get back to the question of the value proposition of why it's important, or do we even think it's important? The top answers of why people thought licensure was important was the ability to call themselves an architect, the ability to practice independently, and the heightened sense of professional standing. The challenges and obstacles of licensure are what we know today: long hours, high cost, lack of rewards, difficulty with the actual process, et cetera, and then the family and the life gets in the way. So NCARB has been a great partner in realizing these challenges with us and then trying to solve for them. They are providing more help and advisement on how to get licensed, and also the value proposition. Firms are contributing by giving incentives for licensure, whether it's a salary uptick or it's supporting the paying of the exam, et cetera, because ultimately it values the firm in lower insurance rates and being able to market different project types and get more responsible people into senior positions. Salary by licensure, those that were licensed made more than their non-licensed counterparts. So if you do decide to go into practice, try to get licensed right away, find a cohort group to support you to do that. The next one is a shift into work-life flexibility and work-life challenges. When asked the question, I have time to pursue interests outside of work, the people that answered yes, again, believed that their day-to-day work was aligned with their career goals, and that the firm leaders actually took time off too. They were walking the talk. They weren't just saying, yeah, there's a policy there for work-life flex. They were taking the 2 weeks off, et cetera, to refresh and re-energize. Those that didn't believe they had enough time, didn't know what the criteria were for performance evaluation, they worked more than 44 hours a week, and there was no work-life flex policies in their firms. The other interesting thing is, if people did take a hit in their, where do they take it? In their personal or their professional side of their lives. Most people, as you could see from the astounding number, took the hit on their personal lives. So whether it was schedule conflicts, poor health, neglected duties, or relationships crumbling, that took priority, unfortunately, over turning down opportunities or leaving a job, et cetera. When asked if people had ever spent a month away from architecture or took a leave of absence, a break, most people said that they had never taken a career break. But surprisingly, if they had the opportunity to take that career break, would they? And a lot of people said, yes, but I haven't asked. So this goes back to talent retention and the fact that we don't value taking a career break. We don't value the leave of absence, but if it means losing somebody who's been there for 10 years and the fact that if you had to replace them, it would cost 2.5 to 3 times their salary to replace them, that is a value proposition. Because with that, institutional knowledge also goes out the door. Shifting gears to childcare responsibility and caregiving, in this lens, women in our respondent pool tended to do more of the caregiving as a primary caregiver. The stigma of who's winning the bread and who's giving the care is still there in parallel to society. And even the time that people take off for the birth of their child, 1 to 3 days on the median for men and 3 months for women. And we see this impacting the salaries, of course. This is parallel to a study dubbed the daddy bonus and the mother penalty. So who makes the most? The male parent. Then the non-parent male, and then the non-parent female, but guess who is making the least? It's the mothers. And then we shift gears again. So that was a lot of depressing information, I know. We're going to shift gears into what are we going to do about it? Okay, so when people ask why does equity matter as a conversation in practice and representation, and why does it matter in design, we start off with the premise that the US Census reports that by 2045, the majority population in the US will be an aggregate of minority, race, ethnicity representations. And why is that important? That is a frightening reality for some people who happen to be in the majority, but is also an exciting opportunity to see what the potential is of diverse thinking and diverse backgrounds in our workforce. And it starts with 2025 is the predictor for the majority of college applicants, college student applicants, which I'm sure you're seeing in your own demographic here. So in the economy, it matters. Again, if we had the potential of, if we had minimized barriers and maximized potential for success for everyone, we would be able to propel the economy to a point where we haven't imagined before. As it relates to health and life expectancy, the shocking thing is that you could be living within a 10-mile radius, and potentially you would be living 9 years less in a different area that has poor access to fresh air and clean water than the people that were fortunate and more privileged enough to live in a different area code within 10 miles. We see equity mattering as a potential for dignity and respect and basic human needs. The idea that people who are transgendered are denied the dignity and respect of basic human needs is something that we have a potential to influence as designers. We're seeing that more and more with our clients, particularly in higher ed, but in the public sector as well, of we need the all-gender restroom, and we don't want just the one room on the side checking the box of all-gender restrooms. So how can we design differently to maintain dignity and respect? Equity applies also to designing places for working mothers and also families in public. So what is deemed uncomfortable and awkward as women breastfeeding in public or diaper changing in public, or the fact that there's kids loitering and do not loiter, or the safety of those around us that are older and more fragile. Where is the place in society that is welcoming and inclusive and safe for all those people? And finally, another alumni of the GSD, Deanna Van Buren, is doing some amazing work with design justice advocacy and designing places that offer dignity and respect and rehabilitation. So I went to when I was speaking at TEDx Philadelphia, there was a gentleman by the name of Jesse Crimes. Yes, Crimes was his last name. And he was an artist, but also a former incarcerated in the system. And what he observed as an artist was saying that the most violent thing that he experienced during his time in prison weren't other prisoners, it wasn't the law enforcement, it was the walls. And that was this shocking aha moment for me about the humanity, the irony that we're supposed to be designing humane spaces, and yet we are denying this vital population access to air and views and light of day, and what that does to their mental health. We hear that, but we don't realize the damage that it's actually doing. So she's doing amazing work there with getting design and access to better places for those populations. Why equity matters for teaching the next generation. So Michael Ford, who is a professor in the Midwest in Michigan, he founded this project called Hip Hop Architecture, and he wrote a book about how hip-hop is actually very heavily related to architecture, and the fact that a lot of the projects that were built in Chicago and of that era, again, were not humane and were damaging to the societies and the culture of the people growing up in those areas with the violence. And as an antithesis to that, he is using hip-hop as a vernacular language for the children to expose them to architecture and the power of design. And he's being sponsored by Autodesk, and he's been around talking about it, but he's also had the architecture camps and the exposure on the Today Show, and it's taking off. These kids who never get exposure to design, access to design thinking or the power that they can make a difference, are learning what architecture is all about. And then finally, our own movement of not just having the survey, but also being active and activists. We gather for a symposium where 250 people come from all over, not only the US, but the world. We had Justine Clark from Parlor in Australia last time around. And as you can see, it is more women than men, but we are getting more men to come to the event because equity is not just for women or people of color. Equity is for everyone, and it affects everyone in more ways that you can imagine. We have panelists talking about what's happening in firms. Again, we need firm leaders to adopt these practices. We need them to believe that it's not just a business case. It's not just adding another dollar value. It's adding value to ultimately what we do in our work for society. And then we ask people to commit to making change, and I ask that of all of you. Of course, we can complain about all the problems we have as architects and the fact that we're currently not satisfied with the way they are, but the only way we can make, you can't be part, sorry, you can't, if you're part of the problem if you're not part of the solution. So I ask each one of you to think about deeply what you're passionate about and to contribute to the movement, to grab your fork and eat that whale with us. We took cards from the Eames House of Cards, and that was one of the activities we did where we all wrote down what our personal commitments were, and we stacked them up like a house of cards, aggregating the collective energy of the movement. And then the hackathon, which is coming up, our 4th hackathon in New York City, is an idea about using design thinking, this Silicon Valley phenomenon. The D School is kind of championing this idea, a different idea about design, which is yes and. It's not putting people down. It's not saying my idea is better than yours. It's building upon, it's improv, it's innovation, it's incubation, and it's saying yes and what else? What can we do better? How can we do things that solve the problems that we are facing that imminently we believe we don't have a solution to? So a group of strangers for 4 hours locked in a room together, they become lifelong friends. And they're all from diverse backgrounds, different gender identities, different parts of the US, different race and ethnicities. And it was an amazing experience, and I encourage you to come to New York this year because we're going to do it again. And we had venture capitalists who said, hey, we should amplify this and support the winning idea, so we're still trying to get funding to be able to do that. Finally, I leave you with some lessons learned. How do we make change? So firstly, the metrics. Support the survey. If you can, take the survey. It's coming out in 3 weeks. Share the findings, share the report, share the video. Measure up if you are working in a firm or you're going to be working in a firm. Bring it there and say, hey, how do we compare to this? This is the safest way you can to say there's something wrong here. It's not your fault, but in a way, this is something that we can all work on together and create positive change. And then once you've reassessed it, if it's not working, make those changes and go at it again. And as far as meaning goes, how do we make deeper connections, not only as a cohort of mentors and sponsors and champions, but how do we make a greater connection to our communities? And it seems like a lot to ask of work-life balance already, of having work and careers, but also being a member, an active member and a citizen of your community. But that's also the pathway to job creation and ideating what's missing in my community and how can we raise money and get that project built, and therefore you become part of the client base. I'm doing that right now with our Board of Ed and the new schools that are being designed, being that design eye, design review, to make sure that we do get good design in the outcome, because we're spending our tax dollars and we want to be careful with that. Embrace technology. I don't need to tell you all that. I usually tell that to the practitioners who are technology tourists, digital tourists, if you will, not digital natives. And the way we connect with each other is on social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, through LinkedIn. It's not just people are adverse to that because they think, oh, somebody's going to troll me and my life is going to end poorly because of that. I'll be terrorized. But it is actually a way that we can empower each other, and building that strength in numbers, building that stronger network of champions to support each other. Seek, be, cultivate mentors. So not only do you want lots of mentors, you want to be the mentor, and then you want to teach the people that you mentor to pass it forward, because that's the only way we're going to get through this together. Engage with your communities and then build your tribe. Again, you might not find like-minded people around you immediately when you go into practice, but you will find them eventually, and especially if you're looking for them intentionally, and stick with them. Finally, there's a happy ending to my own story, sorry I keep doing that, of hitting a glass ceiling, if you will, in the caregiving challenges. And I found a firm, finding the right fit. It was a long journey, but I found a firm in Smith Group, JJR, who not only, I didn't realize at the time because they took a year trying to recruit me, and I kept saying, not now, I'm too busy, I'm too busy. But slowly realizing that they did have values that aligned with my own, that they weren't just spouting off that, yes, we're diverse, but they were actually doing something about it. So they hired me to head up their equity, diversity, inclusion program, but also to practice architecture in the way that we feel is of building value. So these are just some images of us sharing that out loud, and also that there are women leaders who are mothers in the San Francisco office and all over the US. So, you know, more women in leadership roles is something that is, again, proof in the pudding that we're making progress. And that was something that led me ultimately to my decision to move. What's next? So again, I mentioned the architecture survey, the national conference in New York, which is relatively close to here, and we're doing a bunch of workshops, a design justice workshop at Grace Farms Foundation. If you haven't had a chance to visit Grace Farms, highly recommended. They're talking about justice as well as art, community, sustainability, and spirituality, the Hackathon, and also another workshop called Architects as Catalysts for Social Change. Again, connecting the meaningful work to your day-to-day work is so important. And finally, the 5th symposium. So last week was the Women's March. How many of you were able to attend? It's okay if you didn't. I found it the first time that I asked my daughter to go with me, future activists in the works. There's a fork in the road where we are today. We can choose fear or we could choose hope. And I hope that we all choose hope together. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. That is a deep thought, existential thing I'm going to leave you with, in thinking, what will you do with the rest of your life to make change and profound impact? And I thank you all for coming.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kantrowitz, a 2018 candidate for Master in Architecture and past co-chair of Women in Design, and we're going to have a few minutes to thank Rosa for joining us and take some questions. If it's all right, I will open up the floor and then hand it over to all of you to ask Rosa. So Thank you so much for that incredible talk. At the GSD, we are thrilled to currently have two female department chairs, but we've still never had a dean that's female, and our faculty is 70% men and 92% men and white ladies. What do you think the GSD administration can be doing to better advance equity within the school, as well as for the future careers of its graduates?
That's too easy.
Just want it on record.
Hint. Hire more women to be faculty members, hire more people of color, intersectionality, right? Not just those binaries, people of all different backgrounds, because we can't be thinking diversely if we don't have that diverse representation in the people that are doing the teaching. It doesn't mean that a white male couldn't be a diverse thinker and teach the diverse skill set. But again, and if you don't see it, ask for it. Somebody at Georgia Tech who was in San Francisco is a grad student there, and she brought that up to my attention. I said, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? I can't do anything about it. What are you going to do about it? So she's putting together a petition. She's getting the local AIA chapters involved in asking that question.
Thank you. From the audience? Here. Oh, there's a microphone for you.
I was wondering, when people take your survey and they're
Yes.
not necessarily architects, how do you deal with that data? How do you represent it? I'm myself a landscape architect, and your data is very interesting, but I'm not exactly sure how that reflects how
Sure.
this all pans out in my profession.
There is a landscape architecture survey. There's a structural engineering survey as well that's paralleled and built on ours. But just because there would be too much information, we do ask that the cutoff point, if you will, is did you go to architecture school and did you graduate from an accredited program? And that's kind of all we need. You could currently be practicing or not, but that's kind of the defining line so that we don't go crazy,
Right.
with these variants.
With information overload.
Yeah, but there is an LSA survey that you could be involved in or amplifying.
Another question? Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's kind of building on that one. I'm curious if you could, I'm sure you've looked, if you could describe to us a little bit about how architecture compares to other professional fields.
Yes, I don't have that slide with me right now, but we fare worse than doctors and lawyers. We fare better than engineers and contractors. Does that help? I can follow up and send you the slide.
Like, if you've identified things that are particularly sticky or challenging about architecture for women and equity issues, than in other professions.
We didn't do any survey analysis on that because we didn't ask respondents of other professions, but we know from cross-comparison that it is the pay issue that's the biggest challenge, again, related to even education. You think that we would make more than some educators, but because of the different tracks, if you will, like for like, we don't make more than them. If you count the time off, if you will, if they worked throughout the year, they would be making more than we would in the years of experience.
Right next to you.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for your talk. And I guess I was wondering, similar along the lines like in other fields, like what sort of significant changes can we make to the kind of larger system of players that are involved in architecture? Because developers, lawyers, politicians, architects are all sort of implicated still in this sort of ongoing destruction of the environment and also indigenous lands. So I'm wondering what sort of...
We're at the cusp of that right now. So the design justice advocacy is starting to connect all the different people related to these aspects. Highly recommend, if you're interested in that, to come to the Design Justice Workshop, because it's looking not only at the immediacy of the outcomes of design justice in the built environment, but where do our materials come from? Who is building our buildings? Is it done with fair wage? Is it done with materials that are in sweatshop factories, et cetera, et cetera? And it's bringing that awareness. It's a difficult conversation. We're not going to solve it tomorrow, but we are starting to talk about it, right?
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Ask an easy question, please.
Well, it's going to be a fun question.
Okay.
So I work with women who are trying to make it into leadership, and a question I get asked is, should I learn how to play golf? Because it seems like that's where everything happens. And I suspect that there's another side of the question, which is that if you are a person in power, and that might mean that you're likely to be a white male, there are things that you might want to learn to do or operate differently in order to maybe meet the people who are learning to play golf halfway. So I guess the question for you is for people in power, specifically maybe white men who find themselves in roles of power, is there one or two or three things that you would suggest that if they want to be allies, they can do to really be proactive allies and to support rising people of color and women in their practices?
So there are some suggestions, again, anecdotally, about the events that are more inclusive, right? So having lunches or rotating between lunches and happy hours, right? So that you can get more of a mix of people. And if you take a group out to dinner, make sure you do a rotation, right? So that you're not just taking the same group that's easy access because they're around you and you work with that group on projects. And the golfing thing is a tough one because I don't know. Some people like to play golf, right? And that's fine and good. But there are other activities that are not gender specific or race, ethnicity. What are those universal activities that people like to do? I'll name a silly one, karaoke. I was just talking to Peter about that. Even if you don't like, or even if you think you can't sing, I think everybody secretly sings in the shower, right? Or in your mind. And music has such a powerful impact on memory and place. And I think if you find those common threads that are universal, even food, right? And then experience food in different ways and not just the same old, but try to encourage cultural exploration through these universal mediums. Is that helpful?
Well,
Oh,
it's all
thank
right.
you.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much for coming. I want to say a special thank you and shout out to all the male presenting folks in the audience tonight. Thank you for being here. And
Yes.
Rosa, thank you so much for that wonderful talk.
Yes.
Maybe we can give Rosa another round of applause.